Good day. I'm Professor Johan Coetzee from the Namibian University of Science and Technology. And today I would like to start a new series about research projects and how to write master's and PhD thesis. Master's is normally referred to as a mini thesis or a thesis. And then a PhD is normally called a dissertation. Now, from my experience, I have supervised extensive number of master students, and also the supervisor of a number of PhD students. I've studied at the University of Stellenbosch, and I've written a master's thesis on public management. During the time it was called public administration. And my master's thesis focused on the increased involvement of government in South Africa from 1910 to 1978, with a specific emphasis also on privatization. Now that was a full master's thesis, not supported by any subjects as one get more and more these days, where you get a mini thesis as part of a master's degree, plus a number of subjects. One also get a PhD these days with a number of subjects and then a full dissertation. On the PhD itself, it is also acceptable at some universities to write different peer-reviewed published articles on a related topic, and then 3 or 4, and then receive a PhD after that's been published together in a book form. Now, during my studies as of a master's thesis, in the increasing involvement of government in South Africa, I've realized that government became more and more involved, and people also demand more and more from government, and therefore I've written that full master's thesis. And it was a very lengthy thesis because it's a full thesis, and this is the thesis itself. You can see the thickness of the thesis. Now, just a few words on that, and that is that government have involved over time in increasing their services to the citizens, not only on demand of the citizens itself, but also by the increasing authoritarian executive power, extending its power over the legislative and judiciary. And therefore, the executive branch that's regarded as the public sector, including offices, ministries, agencies, and agencies include now public-private enterprises, also forms part of the executive arm, the implementation arm of the executive branch, where the decisions of the executive is being normally taken by the president and the cabinet, or by the prime minister and the cabinet, that then needs to be executed by the executive. And it's quite clear that in 1910 in South Africa, for example, there were not so many, there were not cooperatives, for example. There were not public-private enterprises or state-owned enterprises or a number of agencies in place. There were no boards that regulated specific crops, for example, as we get now in South Africa and also in Namibia. The government were not responsible for clean air and also not for clean water. And to very limited extent also only for education, and not for education for everybody. So over time, the big brothers' increase in power actually increased to such an extent that we have a problem with bureaucracy today. And the father of bureaucracy was obviously Max Weber of Germany. And during the 1980s, Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan put government on a diet, and there was also taking place a number of privatization of the government to make the government lean and mean, and also to focus on the core business of government and to compare and benchmark government services with the private sector in order to arrive at the unit price, where even in the United Kingdom, museums have become cost centers in order to generate money and not just an expense. Also, the provision of water was privatized, where one in the United Kingdom, you could, in the 1980s and the 90s, get different competitors for the supply of water, but they use the same network, the same supply network. Same with British Telecom, that was privatized, and so on and so forth. Now, there is always there should always be a cooperation between private sector and the public sector, and the public and the private sector. But what we need today is a bigger private sector and a smaller public sector. We need a very efficient public sector that's very small and lean and mean, and to leave the rest for the private sector that have the innovation, the capabilities, the skills, the competency, that employ the best people, best qualified people, and the people with the best experience and with the best entrepreneurship. Now that just, I think some of this I've also mentioned in a previous video in a previous series about the requirements for a sustainable government that I've called on YouTube blueprints for sustainable government and sustainable governance. Now, what I've learned from that master's thesis is that there is some role for government to play. Everybody cannot take accountability for defense, for example. Everybody cannot take accountability for providing water. You still can have competition in providing water, but the infrastructure should be supplied by the government. And this is what the Nordic countries did very well. So what I've also learned from that master's thesis is that there is a golden thread that should run through the whole thesis. So you start off by on a very broad basis, and then you end on a very broad basis again in the last chapter. Now, in order to decide on what is a topic for a master's thesis, is dependent on a problem. There should be a substantial problem, and you must prove that there is a substantial problem. That if the problem is not addressed, then there will be severe consequences, or there have been already severe consequences for that. Now, one cannot just choose a topic based on what you like and what you don't like. If you can't prove that there is a problem statement, if you can't articulate the problem and provide outcome-based evidence of such a problem that exists, then you cannot decide on a topic, and then you can proceed with your master's or PhD studies. So you can use official documents to prove if you're working in the government or the private sector, or private documents to prove, business documents to prove that the problem exists. And those sources must be valid and reliable, and they should not be falsified. Now, that is very important because if you do a study on for example, the procurement in Namibia, then you should prove in terms, for example, of national documents that there is a problem with procurement. Say, for example, in audit reports or in parliamentary standing committees responsible for the economy, for example, or select committee on natural resources that is dealing also with procurement, as we currently have in Namibia, where we have a parliamentary committee on natural resources. However, we don't have we don't audit our natural resources. We don't have a list. We don't keep record of the extraction of our natural resources. And we have a hydrogen project that I've mentioned in another series about the blueprints of sustainable government, over which the Parliamentary Committee on Natural Resources have no insight. That is solely run by State House, for example. So one needs these type of documents in order to prove that the problem exists in procurement. And there can be sets of problems in procurement. The problem situation can be part of different problems and different sets of problems. Like, for example, in corruption. And I've done my PhD on anti-corruption strategies in developing countries. Study of the co-producers of systemic corruption and its negative impact on socioeconomic development, just to illustrate that. And my supervisors was the well-known Professor Philip Spies. He was the Director of Futuristic Studies at the University of Stellenbosch, and also retired Professor Willie Estreiser, that played a huge role in visiting Mandela, the first president of the Republic of South Africa after independence and democratization, in jail to start talks between the National Party and the ANC. And so very well-known, respected professors, and I have a lot of gratitude towards them in being able to be supervised by them. And that is very essential because one, as Marx indicated, who educates the educator. So doing your research topic for a PhD and a master's degree, you should select a supervisor that is communicative and that is productive, that can provide guidance, and he or she will not write the thesis for you. If you cannot do it, the supervisor should just say rephrase, and you have to find out yourself how to do it. Because if you don't know how to do it, then it's your research to find out how you should do the research. But by no means you should expect from a supervisor of a master's or PhD thesis to write it for you, as sometimes happen due to the quality of some students and the throughput. Has been an expectation by tertiary institutions in countries to actually have graduated PhD and master students that sometimes lower than the required standard. And the quality of writing of PhD and master students over the years have been deteriorated. In the 1970s and 1980s, it was unheard of at the University of Stellenbosch that the student would have sent his PhD or master's thesis for proofreading, my apology, because that in that time the quality of writing was as such, and the logistic expertise of the students were as such, that they were experienced people that have done numerous peer review articles before even starting or commencing on a PhD or a master students. But since the 1990s and the 2000s, there's so many expectations that the sky is the limit for everybody to write a PhD and a master student. And therefore, the quality of the sentence construction also deteriorated. Students don't always know to provide crisp, focused, and short sentences. They don't know how to write paragraphs. That your first sentence in the paragraph should indicate what the paragraph is all about. And then the last sentence of the paragraph should then also indicate the transition between that paragraph and the next paragraph. So equip yourself with writing skills before you attempt writing a master's or a PhD, because that will save yourself a lot of frustration for you and your supervisor, and you will write it in much less time compared to when you start doing your research for a master's thesis, and then also need to undertake writing skills in order to write it. Also read comprehensively a number of masters and PhD students that are of quality before you attempt, so that you know what to expect, and not just any PhD or master's student. Because we know that the quality of master's and PhD thesis and dissertation have deteriorated over the years, and specifically in developing countries, and also people from developing countries that went during the liberation struggles in Africa to developed countries to write there, to do research, and then being assisted by supervisors, and to a certain extent that there was an expectation for them to assist the students, and some students also get qualifications in that sense that were not actually meeting the required standards, but of course empathy or sympathy for the required students in the liberation struggle. And I've been in the government of Namibia, employed at the time of independence and before independence, and I can speak with authority on that. And then after independence, a number of standards have been reduced to such an extent in the government because of the quality of people employed in government that have been received their tertiary education and masters and honors and or dissertations in developed countries, actually, and some in Eastern Bloc countries like Romania and Czechoslovakia and so forth that were substandard. And there is, as a result of that, and also the standard of the public service has been reduced, and some rules and regulations for example, span of control in work study methods and time studies and observation studies and functional studies then have been reduced and also left behind as a result of that. So this is an illustration how important quality of master's and PhD dissertation and thesis are actually for a country to uphold a certain standard of not only education but output in the public service and in the industry, in the private sector as well. So in order to write a master's and PhD student, first of all, to return to the problem statement. You can't prove that you have a substantial problem, and newspapers don't provide evidence of that. It can only provide supportive evidence, but it's not regarded as academic credible evidence because of the level of investigative journalism have decreased, and in Namibia is almost non-existent, except for the Namibian and maybe one or other daily newspaper. So also Wikipedia is not a reliable source, and it cannot be used for a master's and PhD. Although you can use it, you can use Google Scholar to find valid information. You can use different search engines. That's very important. And you can use even chatbot to write something for you or to get information for you. But the onus is still on you to verify that the information that's been found, that it's valid, that's reliable, that it hasn't been falsified. Otherwise, your supervisor will tear you apart. What students don't know or sometimes forget when they apply for writing a PhD or a master's student, except for drafting your proposal and proving that you have a severe problem, and that if not addressed will have severe consequences, is that the moderator, the expectation of the moderator is to be the ultra critical person, more so than even the supervisor, because normally you are not supposed to know who is the moderator. Then, secondly, the moderator is there to fail you, to find fault of everything that you have written, to spend time to detail, to see if you have achieved your objectives, and we will come to that. To what extent have you achieved your objectives? Do your research methodology correspond with the type of study that you have chosen to do? Are your findings valid and reliable? Do you have a control group to prove that your findings are valid and reliable? Do your recommendations, are your recommendations implementable? What is the significance of the study? And to whom are you going to present the study? What is the likelihood that the study outcome will be implemented? Or is it just another study for the sake of a study to receive a promotion in your work environment? So with that, with this, I would say that your topic depends first of all on your problem statement. That you have to draft a problem statement and prove to your supervisor or to a committee that the problem statement exists, that the impact is severe, that official documentation and proof of valid, reliable sources exist, and that your problem statement is actually researchable, that you have passion for your study to be undertaken, and it is not just for the case of doing something in order to receive a thesis. So this is very important, that your a problem statement should not just only exist, but it should be researchable, and your financial means in order to do it is also extremely important. And try to identify a supervisor that is of high quality, that have published before, that is willing to support you, but is not going to write the thesis or the dissertation for you. And then the literature should not be old. You should also include the latest sources, unless you can prove that the old data that you use or old sources that you use is still relevant. And then you should indicate this as such, that these data is actually still, or the data are actually still valid, and why they are still valid. You should also indicate in the literature study, and that come after the first chapter. And the first chapter normally consists about the introduction, background, problem statement, the significance of the study, and then the limitations in which you should criticize yourself. And here, the more critical you are, the better for you, because that provides some self-reflection on the gaps in your dissertational thesis. And so you cannot just write sugar-coated reports there. And that's extremely important. So that is the first chapter. And the second chapter is dealing with the literature review. And the next video I will talk about the how to do the literature review, and then also the rest of drafting a research dissertation, all the different chapters that will follow on that. Thank you.